It's the week ending Friday the 28th of August, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook refusing to resign under pressure from President Trump, Nigel Farage unveiling Reform UK's detain and deport policy for undocumented migrants, and in a big moment for millennials, Taylor Swift announcing her engagement to Travis Kelce. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the Week's digital team, it's the full set, Jamie Timson and Harriet Marsden, and from the Week Junior Senior Editor, Felicity Capon. And I note that there has been a rise of lost luggage accounts on social media this week, people trawling through unclaimed cases for treasure. I'm not going to ask you if you've ever stolen anything from a bag, but what is the most important thing you've ever lost and then found?
This is a bit embarrassing, but I was the stupid person who left my laptop on the tube once, and I thought that's gone forever. Like, I just kissed goodbye to that laptop. There's absolutely no way I'm ever seeing that again. And I actually went to the trouble of filling out one of those TFL lost blah 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 things, and I got it back. I could not believe it. It restored my faith in humanity for like 10 seconds. I'm
enjoying this. Felicity, Jamie, have you ever lost and found anything?
I lost my government phone when I worked at DFT.
Wow, that could have been a story.
And it turned up behind the bar at one of the pubs that we go to in Whitehall. But I got it back, and only minor embarrassment on my part.
I found a mobile phone on the floor at a classic car show last year, handed it in, and it turned out it belonged to Prince Michael of Kent.
What? We should have kept
What
that.
are the chances? Yeah. Felicity, what about you?
I was at a book launch once where a girl lost her engagement ring and was ashen-faced and beside herself. I think she had just been proposed to and then lost the ring at this book launch. So everyone, including the authors, were like on hands and knees scrabbling around to find the ring. But I actually can't remember whether we found it or not, which goes to show that I clearly didn't care about the outcome.
It doesn't bode well for the marriage, does it, if you lose the engagement
It was
ring?
a sign. It was clearly a sign, and that's what I told her.
Harriet, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Ukraine's ticking time bomb.
I try to imagine if this was my home and I just lost everything, trying to rebuild, but I got to get these explosives, out of my area so I can safely do it. And that's the kind of care you put into this work right here, is because what if this was your home? Then what?
Retired US Army Green Beret Ryan Hendrickson on his YouTube channel Tip of the Spear Landmine Removal, filming this week in Ukraine. Harry, Ukraine hardly an underreported story generally. What about it are we missing?
I think that the slightly less reported aspect of the war in Ukraine is just how much damage that has been done that will last for a long time after the war in Ukraine. So we're talking about how it's thought to be one of the most heavily mined countries in the entire world. So even before Russia invaded, it had planted mines all over Ukrainian territory, especially in the south, in Crimea and in parts of the east as well. But in the last 3 years since Russia invaded, more than 2 million mines are thought to have been scattered all over Ukraine, and about a quarter of its landmass is thought to be contaminated with landmines and unexploded bits of like mortar shells, that kind of thing. And that's about the size of England. So there's this extraordinary, huge challenge of how to start clearing these mines to be able to reuse some of this territory, even while Russia is still continuing to booby trap areas with landmines.
Yeah. So whatever discussion is happening now about any potential resolution to this war, whoever's living on this land, frankly, whether they be Ukrainian or Russian, they're in danger.
Yeah, so it's thought that there are about 6 million people living on or near contaminated areas. But this also affects people far beyond the borders of Ukraine, because this is also Ukraine being one of the foremost food producers of the entire world, producing wheat and corn and sunflower oil in particular. All of the land that is either potentially contaminated or actually contaminated can't be used. And also when Russian troops retreat, for example, Ukrainian troops cannot retake that territory until the landmines, that they know that it's safe with it's been checked for contamination. So, 6 million people directly affected, and more than 1,000 people have been injured and 360 killed by landmines since the start of the war, including 18 children. But this is a problem. This is a problem that is going to be the world's problem, just like every other war zone that is still contaminated by landmines decades after wars have ended, is the world's problem.
Yeah, and a lot of people listening will be thinking about this, Felicity, I'm sure, those images of Princess Diana in the 90s. I thought this was kind of resolved. People weren't using mines, certainly not on this scale anymore.
Well, that's certainly how it was looking, because in 1997, when the Ottawa Treaty was signed by many nations, but notably not Russia and not the US and not China, I don't think. But it very much at that time was the sentiment was that mines are just morally unacceptable. They go beyond the battlefield. They're indiscriminate. They affect ordinary people, children. They lie there for decades after the war has ended. And there was such this repugnance towards them that all these nations just decided to sign this treaty. And you're right, it was Princess Diana and Tony Blair, and it was a big kind of a big movement to get rid of them. And what's really sad is that all of that is now unraveling and it's being undone because the countries that share a border with Russia, so Poland, Finland, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, have announced that they are withdrawing from the Ottawa Convention. And Ukraine has also announced that it plans to follow their lead because they have decided that they have to fight fire with fire, and because Russia was never party to this convention, to this treaty. The only way that they can think about defending themselves properly is the idea of a new Iron Curtain, which is to stuff their border with this aggressive country with millions of landmines to try and stop them an invasion. And there is speculation that whether Russia gets what it wants out of Ukraine or it doesn't, that it could turn its attention to another country along its border. And so they are seeing these mines as a deterrent.
Yeah, and Jamie, it's worth saying, isn't it, these mines sort of aren't your granddad's mines, right? There are the sort of, land mines, similar to what you might have seen, I suppose, in World War II. But now they jump, they're dropped by drone, they're in the sea. These are technologically different.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the reason that, Harriet was saying that people are so fearful of them. It's a huge amount of explosive and firepower that basically stops people from using any of that land because they don't want to go near. It's not like just that you can step on one bit of area. Sometimes it's, the area that's covered by the mine is sometimes huge. You don't know what else might trigger it further around so it kind of instills a lot of fear. It's indicative kind of the way it feels like the world is going a bit, that all of these people are pulling out of the Ottawa Treaty, all of these countries. Zelensky himself has basically, said there is no other substitute in terms of defense purposes for anti-personnel mines, and particularly when the Kremlin has the largest stockpile of anti-personnel mines in the world. He's saying it's basically the only way to level the battlefield, but, anti-landmine campaigners really do see this as a kind of larger trend, that we've talked about actually on this podcast, of international rules-based order, international humanitarian norms being eroded as more and more countries go, well, actually, we can't really sign up or subscribe to these rules anymore because the world has changed.
And incidentally, Harriet, the news story of the week, the reason we're talking about this now, is to do with how they can diffuse these mines, isn't it? It's not completely hopeless.
It isn't. So this week, the Ukrainian State Emergency Service said that it would start using the robotic dogs that they have been using on the battlefield to help clear the landmines. So these little remote-controlled little robot dogs, which are actually supplied by a British company, they're kind of like a walking version of the aerial drones. So they're remote controlled. And the idea is to reduce the risk to Ukrainian sappers and mine diffusers, because you can sort of approach the mines remotely with the little camera. But unlike traditional bomb diffusing robots, they can also sort of jump and climb upstairs and go through the thick grass, which makes them a bit more appropriate for the type of land and the type of cities that they're working in. But what's interesting, I think, about this story is that most of the landmine clearing is still done by people, and in particular women. because before 2022, only men were allowed to work in explosive disposal in Ukraine. And like we were saying, there were a lot of landmines in Ukraine before the war. And what's so tragic is that so many mines were cleared so painstakingly, only to just be like the country's become littered with them again. But now, because of all the men being subject to the draft, a lot of the mine clearing is now done by women, often in really high heat and wearing like really heavy gear. You're on your hands and knees, just painstakingly going through the grass bit by bit by bit, looking for tripwires. And there are a lot of different demining groups in Ukraine. There's lots of different methods that they're using. They're also using real dogs. They're also using like sniffer dogs to sniff out TNT. But generally speaking, it's even with like AI algorithms to help and drone footage and satellite footage to help, it's such painstaking, slow, human and really, really risky work.
Is there any way, do you think, Felicity, of putting the genie back in the bottle? Or do you think it is a case of, because of the technological advancements, both in planting and then demining these things, they're not, going to slow down? They're not going to go back to the level we achieved?
I think it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle, really. Like, it is, as Harriet was saying, just the painstaking work of removing them. But I do think what is changing a little bit is the technological innovations that are being introduced to try and clear the mines. So using high resolution satellite imagery, thermal drone cameras and artificial intelligence to accelerate analysis of where they are. Which is helping to some extent. I mean, it's worth saying that it's so costly trying to clear these mines. I saw a prediction that it's like £31 billion to rid Ukraine of its mines, and massively reliant on other countries and private companies to help out. But as Harriet was saying, it does still sort of require that painstaking human effort of removing them. So there might be other ways that can help in clearing them, but it's still going to take such a long time. Even if this war ends, even if there is a war in sight, it's going to take ages to clear them, really.
And Jamie, what's the military logic of using them at all, really, given that they are indiscriminate, given that Russia actually wants this land? I mean, it's not just putting it in places where, are not contested. It's putting landmines in places where they want Russians to go and live.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of... They're often called the perfect soldier, in that they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't distinguish between individuals. I kind of see it from a perspective of the disruption that they cause is huge. We were discussing earlier about the fact that they're in the sea. Ukraine have said that they've accused Russia of dropping them into the Black Sea and other areas to kind of disrupt international shipping. It does seem slightly short-sighted, but I guess at this point in the war, from Russia's perspective, there's an element of like, well, we want to cause as much disruption and damage as possible to kind of bounce them into peace talks. Just to think about the future, we did obviously sign the Ottawa Treaty. We have obviously had the use of landmines in the past, the Second World War and the Cold War. It looks like we're moving back towards a stage that is quite depressing, but we all understand, and I think as you were referencing the Diana stuff, that the visual, the use of it in Cambodia, in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, the visual side of that is really powerful of the children that are being lost to this. I think that in the future where there is a peace, that could be one of the ways in which we put pressure again on Russia or any country that's using it to avoid doing so.
Yeah, I mean, it's grim to imagine, but there's a potential, isn't there, Harriet, considering what Jamie was just saying about the Black Sea, that one of these sea mines could find itself over on a pleasure cruise in, Bulgaria or Romania or Turkey, and that would be a major international incident.
I mean, I'm not sure about how credible that would be technologically speaking. But it is true that many people believe that the Black Sea is now littered with naval mines. And as we were saying, even as technology advances with new methods of clearing mines, so too does technology advance with new methods of dropping them. Like, most of the Russian mines are no longer planted by armies, they're planted by drones. But I think that the broader picture here is that landmine use and casualties are growing all over the world, like not just in Ukraine. So there was the Landmine Monitor last year, which was published in November, reported a nearly 22% increase in deaths or injuries by mines since 2022. Most of those were civilians, and nearly 40% of those were children, because a lot of landmines are detonated by children. They are less vigilant. They tend to run around more. A lot of landmines are very cynically and cruelly hidden inside toys. Like, that was particularly notable in Afghanistan. And even as there are these great global efforts to clear mines, from Angola, Cambodia, Colombia in particular, landmine use has significantly increased in Myanmar in particular, since the military took power in 2021. And Syria is also one of the most mined places in the world. Casualties are also increasing in Yemen, even as violence has decreased since the 2021 truce. So I think that what we maybe should focus on a little more is the kind of broader picture beyond Ukraine, that even while we resolve conflicts, the rise in armed conflicts we're not keeping pace with the rate at which conflict is increasing. And what's so sad about the Ottawa Treaty, which was this landmark agreement to ban anti-personnel mines, is that it led to a 95% reduction in landmine casualties in just 15 years. It was such a success. But while so many countries were busy destroying their stockpile, others were busy, like Russia, massively increasing it. So we're just not keeping pace with the level of violence and the rate of increase of danger that is the reality of the world.
Yeah, and from a British perspective, Felicity, finally, I guess, we do see sort of unexploded bombs from World War II occasionally crop up and things like that, don't we? But basically, these landmines, if this new Iron Curtain comes about that we've described, are getting closer to where we are, just geographically.
That's true. I think the earlier point that we made about it affecting, yes, they are closer, but also the fact that Ukraine is such an agricultural powerhouse and is such a huge exporter of grain and oil, as we mentioned. I think that is something that could keep it on the international agenda in a kind of cynical way. Obviously we should care about this because people are dying and getting maimed and wounded and cause all sorts of damage. But the other thing is that we really rely on Ukraine for quite a lot of its food exports, and so much of the land. Even land where there aren't mines, it's just not, people just don't know, there's that uncertainty. So farmers just can't farm anymore. So I think that is an interesting side of this story, because I'm hoping that that's what keeps it on the international agenda, is that it will affect the rising costs of food for so many of us, because all of this land just can't be farmed anymore.
Up next, is there a new reason to sing Good Morning Baltimore? Perhaps. Find out after this. Jamie, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
A rare spot of good news from across the pond.
But let me just give you some reality. In 2003, 2004, I'll give you a better example. The police department made 91,697 arrests in a city of 600,000 people, roughly.
Yeah,
there were 278 homicides in Baltimore that year. In 2024, the police department made 17,872 arrests. There were only 201 homicides.
Wow.
Right?
That is a really wild stat.
Brandon Scott, Mayor of Baltimore, on the Chris Hayes podcast for MSNBC. Baltimore, Jamie, a place that for a certain generation is synonymous with the HBO crime series The Wire, but a city that has been making some progress.
Yeah, I would like it if you reacted in the same way to the stuff that we said on our podcast. That kind of wow, that'd be great. Yeah. Wow, I'd get real good
when you really
feedback.
wow me. Yeah, okay.
Fair enough.
I'll bear that in mind.
That was the mayor, Brandon Scott of Baltimore, just basically talking about the violence prevention that they've done, and he gave some stats there of how many homicide, the level of homicides has gone down this week. Donald Trump, because he's not ever that far away from any of us, really. He's threatened to deploy troops to Baltimore, escalating a clash with Maryland Governor Wes Moore. He said that we've obviously seen him send troops into DC, and he's threatened to do that in Baltimore. But what's interesting is that actually, well, one, probably Baltimore would argue, or the mayor of Baltimore, Brandon Scott, would argue that he doesn't actually need Trump's help or the troops' help, but actually the kind of efforts and the work of Brandon Scott as mayor and the what they call the group violence reduction strategy, which brings together community groups and charities, and has had like a massive success, really.
Give us some examples then of what he's managed to achieve.
So, I mean, if you look at I'll try and do a bit of a potted history. Baltimore had a relatively high violent crime rate. We've obviously seen The Wire, the ins and outs of what the problem was, but it really shot up in the wake of Freddie Gray's death and the protests after Freddie Gray in 2014-2015. What they decided to do was to look at the data when it comes to who the perpetrators of violent crime are, but also who the victims are, and actually offer kind of effective intervention. What that looks like is, or as he was saying, is a community-based approach. So violence interruption programs, safe street initiatives, creation of community hubs staffed by local people. To give a specific example, what it means is if the data shows that you're likely to either be a victim or a perpetrator of violent crime, you will have someone come to your door and hand you a letter written by Brandon Scott, basically offering you two options. One would be using the charities and local groups, a kind of work program or basically help, an intervention help, or they say it's very likely that you'll end up being arrested or the victim of a crime. And the stats show that anyone that has been had this intervention, 95.7% of the people who've accepted support have not been victims or re-victimized, and 97.7% have not recidivated. That's a difficult word to say. So I bring it to the table really because I think, one, I didn't actually know this before we came, that actually Baltimore was doing such an amazing job, but it also shows the power of community and treating violence as almost as an illness and a health issue in the same way that we would do with a virus. And one of the things that he brings up in that podcast, which I would really recommend people listen to, is the decline of the third space, and I think it's something that we've talked about on this podcast before, about how youth clubs, sports centres, libraries, community areas have all declined. And actually that's one of the few ways that you can interact with young people at a time when they're most vulnerable, and we certainly see that in the UK.
Okay, lots to unpick there. Let's just focus, first of all, Harriet, though, I guess, on the reason this is in the news at the moment, which is that Trump wants to send the National Guard into Baltimore, despite all the success that Jamie's just outlined there in reducing crime and homicides. Why does he want to do that? Is he just keen to press on with this policy regardless of whatever, counter-information you can put up to say it's not necessary?
Well, Trump's threats, and in the case of Washington, D.C., what he's actually done to deploy National Guard troops to often quite Democratic-led cities, is, he says, it's part of what he calls his crackdown on crime. He's also suggested that he would deploy troops to New York and Chicago as well. But it also appears to be a very direct response to the governor of Maryland, Governor Moore's invitation letter to Trump, in which he invited Trump to come and take a walk in Baltimore and see how well it was doing. He invited the president to see firsthand the success of this community-based group deterrence initiatives that have been so unbelievably successful in bringing down violent crime. And Trump described that invitation as nasty and provocative.
It was provocative, wasn't it? I mean, I don't think it was nasty. It was politely written, but it was provocative. It was saying, don't trash talk me, come and see my city.
If it was provocative, I think that you could argue that Moore had a very good reason to be provocative, given that there was all this rhetoric coming out of Trump that was just disprovable by federal statistics and every possible metric that we have to show the success of all these initiatives in Baltimore. So this is a wider picture of the kind of the use of like military personnel for domestic law enforcement, which many Democrats are describing as an abuse of power, and some Republicans also seem to be quite uncomfortable with as well. But it's a part of a wider picture of this kind of Republican-led trash talking of big American cities, despite the actual evidence to show that violent crime in American cities overall is falling from pandemic highs. This isn't just a story of Baltimore, though Baltimore is a shining example. Violent crime was already massively down in Washington, D.C. too.
I think Trump is also keen generally to be seen as strong on crime because it plays well with his base, regardless of what the stats show or what's on the ground. He has always talked very admiringly of sort of strongman leaders across the world. So I don't think it really matters what's going on in the ground. He wants to be shown that he is strong. He likes the idea that he is creating a sense of security that, it's somewhat up to the people who live in these cities and states, whether they feel that's what he's doing or not. But it did make me think of what's going on in El Salvador, and Trump has expressed an interest in the leader there, Nayib Bukele, who has basically turned El Salvador from being the world's murder capital into a country that is safer than Canada, according to government data. And there's been like a precipitous drop in homicides particularly, but that has come with the cost to kind of due process and human rights and all that sort of thing. But I just bring it up as an example to show that Trump wants to be seen to be strong on crime, and he wants to have that kind of strong man image about him, I suppose.
Yeah, and whatever you think of that heavy-handedness, Jamie, and from a British perspective, whatever you think of Donald Trump, I think if you see images of, heavily armed military patrolling a city when there doesn't appear to be an emergency just to make a political statement, is quite a scary thing to see. Nonetheless, does it actually, if he follows through with this policy, make things less safe, undo the work that the mayor of Baltimore's been doing? I mean, theoretically, more security on the streets, that should make things even safer, shouldn't it? What's the problem?
I think that particularly in areas like Baltimore, where there has been a lot of problems with policing, with security, and with people on the ground feeling unsafe. The Freddie Gray protest that I referenced earlier kicked off a massive distrust in the police. We all remember it, of the kind of defund the police motto. And I think what Brandon Scott and the Baltimore his administration in Baltimore has done very well is to actually almost take the policing out of it while he works with the policing. The people on the street and on the ground are these charities and community members and people that maybe have more trust from the people that you're trying to help and engage with. And I think that's really crucial when you think like top down. We put the National Guard in. A lot of that National Guard people maybe aren't from Baltimore or won't know the places that they're patrolling. And unfortunately, if you've got in a difficult situation where people don't trust the security that are there, it can be a tinderbox. And I think Trump in a way almost wants that. Like he wants that feeling of kind of volatile nature, because it proves him right. He can say, he described it as a hellhole the other day. He can say like, this is, these places, these cities are unlawful and I can come in and solve it.
Well, also part of the success of the initiatives in Baltimore is attributed to gun control. So they enacted the first federal gun control legislation in 28 years with the support of some Senate Republicans. And instead of listening to what Trump says, I think it's much more instructive to look at what his administration does. So on his first day in office, he closed the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And 3 months later, the DOJ cut the $300 million allocated to community violence intervention grants in half, including a lot in Baltimore. And that was part of almost $1 billion worth of culling of violence reduction grants. So that's funding for like victim services, conflict mediation, social workers, hospital-based programs, targeted deterrence like what they've got in Baltimore. That's all gone. You're in a situation where a president has directly cut funding or closed offices that are dedicated to gun violence reduction and just altogether community-based intervention, and then sending troops, military federal troops, like the National Guard, into cities they don't know, rather than sending them to the border to stop the influx of drugs or guns in the first place, to effectively possibly take credit for Baltimore having the fewest homicides in over 50 years. It strains belief to argue that it's designed to make people feel safer.
Felicity, when it comes to what they've actually achieved in Baltimore, though, are there lessons for other countries around the world, for us here in the UK?
Certainly, when you look at crime in this country, I mean, it's a very mixed picture, certainly. Shoplifting is up, robbery is about the same, homicide is slightly down, fraud is massively up, bike theft, phone theft, that sort of thing. What you are seeing is that lots of young people, more and more young people are getting involved in crime, and younger young people, so more 10 to 14-year-olds are now committing crime. There's obviously knife crime issues, just over 50,000 offences involving a sharp instrument recorded in the year ending March 2024, and that was 4.4% higher than the previous year. I imagine it's a perfect storm, really, of so many factors why young people get swept up into crime. But going back to the third space idea, I think that's really important, because obviously one of the tragedies of the last decade or so has been spending cuts to youth services. So spending by councils in England has dropped by 73% since 2010. That's over £1 billion of money. And that's partly because councils are broke. So there just isn't the money, or they have to divert what money they do have to frontline services, children in immediate danger who need looking after. But that funding that was so important in Baltimore that Trump is now threatening to withdraw is also not there in the UK either. And it just seems to make sense that if kids don't have something to do, as you know, something fulfilling, something rewarding, adults who will believe in them, who will, you know, give them the sense that there is a future waiting for them, then it's not hard to see that they would go down a crime route instead. So there is a comparison to be made in that sense, I think.
And do you think that will resonate, Jamie? You wanted to introduce this idea of the third space sort of concept. I mean, is it basically that the political class and journalists and all the rest of it, generally speaking, their kids do have something to do? You know, they can afford to take them on holiday, they have gardens, and they can't really relate to people who literally sit around at home and have nothing to do but hang around on street corners.
Yeah, I think that's quite a fair assessment. I think, as Felicity was saying, the council were left with very little choice in terms of how they were going to use what little money they were given and left with. So the investment in community spaces just completely dropped off. I think the other thing, and we've again talked about this on the podcast before, but it is about education and exclusions from school, and the number of missing children that there are since COVID actually is insane. You know, the number of people who have literally just dropped off, the children that have dropped off the registers of schools, and often these are from poorer working class backgrounds, these people, and the education system just doesn't have the facilities or the money or the focus at the moment to look out for these young people. I think it's to me it's so indicative when we talk about, like, you know, the protests in the summer and that have happened in the UK, and of a lot of people who feel disenfranchised, and part of that is because of the lack of funding in local areas that basically are forgotten about by a lot of the media and political classes. You know, we've got a supposedly left of centre government in at the moment that should be funding this stuff, and I believe that they're trying, but they could look at what's happening in Baltimore and see not only does it bring crime down, but it also does engage young people and give them hope.
Okay, up next, why first ladies are becoming ladies of letters. That's after this. Right, Felicity, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week we learnt that the pen pal is mightier than the sword?
Prepare for landing, the pilot announced. I pressed the off button on my Walkman and gazed out the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of New York City in the distance. My heart pounded with excitement. I was 26 years old, and while I had traveled everywhere in Europe, I had never been on a journey quite like this. This was America.
Melania Trump, or an officially endorsed AI version of her anyway, reading from her audiobook Melania, available now at melaniatrump.com. Felicity, why are first ladies in the news?
Well, several of them have started penning letters to one another. So on Saturday, the Turkish First Lady Emine Erdogan wrote to US President Donald Trump's wife Melania, urging her to get in touch with Israel's Prime Minister and raise the plight of children in Gaza. The letter was published by the Turkish presidency. The First Lady said that Gaza had become a children's cemetery, and she was telling Melania, we must unite our voices and strength against this injustice. And this follows a pattern. So when the Russian President Vladimir Putin met Trump in Alaska, Trump handed him a letter from Melania. It was a peace letter highlighting the impact that his war in Ukraine was having on Ukraine's children. And she implored him to think of children and an innocence which stands above geography, government, and ideology. And on top of that, the First Lady of Ukraine then wrote to Melania thanking her for her comments for getting involved in the plight of Ukraine's children. And it just struck me as really interesting that all these First Ladies have decided to write letters to one another.
Yeah, although, I mean, quite nice. I mean, from a diplomatic point of view, I think I prefer a world where, ladies write letters to each other arguing for the safety of children. It seems like quite a good pace to operate international affairs at.
Certainly. I mean, I think it's sort of, I found it very intriguing because I find Melania Trump in particular a very interesting person, but more broadly, the role and the position and the power of First Ladies, I think is a fascinating one. Like, how much power are they wielding behind the scenes? Melania is a particularly interesting case because she seems to be a very take it or leave it First Lady. Like, she will only get involved in things when she wants to, which, to her credit, I think it shows that she does actually genuinely really care about the plight of children. Yeah,
and gives it more power, perhaps. Yeah,
exactly. I think it gives it more power, but it's very interesting the comments about her presence. There was a disclosure in late May that she has spent less than a fortnight in the White House since her husband's second inauguration. So she will pick and choose what she wants to do, but I think that makes it more telling that she decided to let Putin know how she feels.
Although I suppose that can be reputationally problematic for these partners, can't it, Harriet? We were just hearing that clip from Melania's website where you can also buy her jewellery and her Christmas ornaments and things, and there's very much an image that she's trying to project with all this stuff. And of course it's easy to say, well, why do you care about the children of Ukraine but you don't care about the children of Gaza? Why do you write a letter about this but not a letter about that? In a way, it's easier not to write any letters at all if you just want to be an image.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance with this because on the one hand, it seems to sort of reek of internalized misogyny to paint this picture of the woman behind the scenes manipulating the man like a sort of Machiavellian puppet master. But on the other hand, it's patronizing and it's frankly unconvincing to suggest that these women, who broadly speaking are worldly, well-traveled, intelligent women, don't and shouldn't have opinions on what their spouses do, and their spouses are also their elected leaders. It seems unrealistic that they wouldn't have an influence. On the other hand, in the case of Melania Trump, it's all well and good for her to be kind of sending this letter, and the only real opinion or cause that anybody's ever seemed to be able to attach to her was when she visited Africa in 2018 and spoke of her pride in the work of the USAID program tackling disease and hunger among children. And Trump has since dismantled the USAID program. And the other thing that we sort of a little bit kind of know about her is that she is pro-abortion rights, supposedly. And Trump has been absolutely instrumental in dismantling the access to abortion and reproductive rights in the US and broader across the world.
Yeah, but you could argue that from the other perspective, couldn't you? You could say maybe dismantling them not as far as he or the Republicans would have liked. Maybe she's had an influence there.
Yes, but we also know from interviews with former security advisors and analysts and former people in his last government that Trump basically tends to listen to whoever he met last. Like whatever pops into his head, we know that that Laura Loomer, a sort of conspiracy theorist to the max, is someone that he apparently listens to a lot. There's something maybe that he saw on Fox News or a tweet or whatever. He's utterly mercurial and inconsistent, and frankly, it's a fool's game trying to fathom any strategy or intentionality.
Letters, though, Jamie, they are, as I was indicating, quite a slow way of communicating. Are they effective? I wonder if they'd be more effective if they weren't published, if we didn't know about them. Maybe there are communications going on that we don't know about.
I'm a big fan of letter writing. I don't do it enough.
Is this you fishing for a letter from Melania?
Actually, from you, Ollie. What I wanted to say is just wow.
Yeah, sure.
Another excellent podcast from you, JT. I think there's obviously is, we know from like diaries and releases of in the archives that there are letters being, or in history, letters written all the time between people, particularly like within the context of first ladies and political spouses. I wonder whether there's a kind of pageantry or a kind of showing off sense. I mean, it's interesting to see the way in which first ladies, I think, or first ladies' first spouses have changed. There was that old Dennis Thatcher quote about being Maggie Thatcher's husband, of being always present but never there. And I think now that's kind of less the case. Carrie Johnson kind of was accused, kind of fairly or unfairly, of shaping Boris Johnson's priorities. Sarah Brown was like massive voice on maternal health and children's welfare when she was when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. And then obviously Philip May, the general election in 2017, he seemed to have quite a big role in getting Theresa May to call it, or at least have the conversation. I think there's more of an expectation now, or certainly more scrutiny on the role of first spouse. And I think that's part of to use another British example, that's part of the interesting thing about Keir Starmer, is the fact that his wife Victoria has really eschewed the public and the media, and that's, I would say, slightly pissed off quite a lot of the media, that they can't get to know more about her and about her views and everything. And there's a kind of, I would say, desire now, because of the role that Michelle Obama has played, that we desperately need to know the opinions and the morals of the spouses of political leaders, and you wonder kind of how necessary or productive that is.
I mean, it does vary from country to country, doesn't it, Felicity? I know that the First Lady of the United States has no sort of official role, or she's able to say what she wants to do or doesn't. Would be the same for a first man, but of course there's no historical precedent there. But at least they have a presidential system, so they're on the campaign trail. You are voting for this couple to live in the White House. It's different in the UK and other parliamentary democracies, isn't it? Keir Starmer's wife, yes, did choose not to be part of the limelight, but also shouldn't be part of that process. You're electing your local constituency MP when you vote. They don't have a role. Yeah,
sure, but I mean, as Jamie was saying, people take such a great interest in the first ladies, in the first spouse, that they're not a democratically elected figure, but it would be stretching incredulity to suggest that they obviously are not going to have a massive influence on their partner who does hold all the power. And I think that's fine. I mean, certainly in the case of the Trumps, I think Donald Trump is getting to the point where he finds it very hard to trust anyone around him. He has... And the same with Melania. I mean, she's been badly burnt by having a couple of staffers who have recorded things she's said and then published them in a book. So I wonder whether, I mean, this is very, very kind of gossipy speculation from me, but I wonder whether they're actually getting closer as a married couple and trusting each other one or more because they don't trust the people around them so much. And I find that fascinating. And in terms of soft power, I mean, soft power is quite powerful, really. I mean, off the back of Melania's letter to Putin, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer both raised the issue of stolen children during a recent summit. And I mean, just in terms of their reach and their popularity popularity. The First Lady of Ukraine has 2.7 million Instagram followers, and she posed for British Vogue at one point. But in her British Vogue article, she talked a lot about, again, the plight of Ukrainian children. So people are very, very interested in these figures, and they can use that to their advantage.
I guess it's just human as well, isn't it, Harriet? I mean, first ladies have something in common with each other, which is they all understand what it means to be the spouse of an important person. And at a dinner where they're sitting opposite each other, perhaps for hours, making small talk, some of them are going to hit it off. I mean, that is a useful connection to make, isn't it? Especially when their partners aren't hitting it off.
Absolutely. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that women and female leaders are far more successful in conflict resolution and negotiations than male leaders. Like, there is a lot of data to back that up. And clearly the male leaders aren't doing such a great job of conflict resolution and violence reduction. So in that sense, maybe the women have a better shot, like statistically speaking. But I think in the case of the UK Prime Minister and the UK Prime Minister's spouse, and Victoria Starmer in particular, you are sort of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because Carrie Johnson was absolutely pilloried by the media for being this supposed kind of praying mantis behind the scenes, like deciding everything for the poor, weak, malleable Boris Johnson, which, I'm not going to comment on whether or not that's true, but the fact is that was how she was painted, like some sort of Lady Macbeth figure. And then you also have such criticism of Victoria Starmer for being supposedly like taking a backseat, staying out of the limelight, keeping quiet. And I think that does show that really, as a female spouse of the UK Prime Minister, there is nothing that you can do that is going to protect you from criticism from the media. There's too much interest, and there's just too much sexism in the way that we speak about them, that it doesn't really matter what she does or doesn't do. She's still going to be criticised for it either way. I don't remember too much negative press for Rishi Sunak's wife. But then she was always very elegantly dressed. She was also the very sexism you're talking about, criticised over and over and over again for conflicts of interest with regards to her investments and with regards to money. But that's not her personality. She was investigated, yes, but you can't say that she wasn't scrutinised. She was scrutinised to the nth degree. Okay. Well, here's a fun fact for you. This topic of first spouses was in fact covered before on The Week Unwrapped. In our first ever episode, here is what Arian McNichol said about First Ladies in January 2017.
And to be fair to Melania, she's already spelled out a political direction that she wants to take, which is to end online bullying hilariously, because, given who her husband is and what he does, it's a remarkable thing for her to want to stop. No stranger to the subject. But I guess she's close to the source, so she can really impact that firsthand.
There you go. So I guess, Felicity, the question is, has much changed since 2017? We're going to be having this exact conversation in another 8 years' time. What's the point of First Ladies?
Yeah, back then, I feel her reputation has changed between the two presidencies. She was absolutely ridiculed, wasn't she? She had the campaign which was Be Better, that everyone just took the piss out of relentlessly. I think now, maybe with this letter writing and this, what seems to be a genuine concern for children around the world, perhaps she is changing her image slightly. But yeah, watch this space.
Well, if she wants to come on the show, or if 11 Labs want to lend us the AI version of Melania, she can come on the show without lifting a finger. Then she can reply. In the meantime, my thanks to you, Felicity, Jamie and Harriet, and to you for listening. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can now watch us as well. And you can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio, for old time's sake. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.